what are some common pitfalls or traps for students? I think there's so much intellectual information out there that in itself can become a trap. But James, I just want to leave this one to you because I know you oversee a lot of community chatter and talk to a lot of teachers. So I'd love to, hear you talk about this for a bit before we sort of part ways.
Gosh, where do I start? Yeah, I mean, it's subtle, right? It's very subtle. Obviously, it depends on where everyone's at. It depends on perspectives. But some of the general things, I've run a few posts about this on Perseus. Is some of the main things is you get people who gets. Let's go through a few. So you get people who get stuck on exercises for years. Okay, so number of reasons. They read the exercise, goes in, brain adds a whole load of extra things, tries to do the extra things, can't do it because they weren't doing the original exercise. Then they go back and read the book and they go, "Oh, actually, I was understanding it wrong." Mm-hmm. So then this can happen for years. Just clarity on what is actually required, not what your brain thinks should be required. Because if any of this stuff was supposed to take 25 years, it wouldn't be in step one. So that's what a lot of people get stuck on. Really be clear on what the results should be and what makes sense. Another one would be, I get so many emails and, what happens after death? What happens here? What happens there? I don't know. Yeah. Like, don't look to someone on the internet to there's got to be self-responsibility in this stuff. If we're going to have self-responsibility in anything, it should be this, right? So don't expect someone to give you all the answers. They're going to give you all the tools, but don't put all your hope on another human being to answer all your questions, because you might get lucky, like we did in working with someone like Mark, the first time you start asking these questions. But more often than not, you're going to get someone who's, and this is the most dangerous, I think, is someone who thinks they're doing you a favor, who thinks they've got all the answers, who thinks they're kind, who thinks they've got God's will and that they're giving it to you. But again, it's just all belief. And they're going to lead you down a garden path. So what I say, I think I wrote this in one of my articles, is that you often see intelligent, talented individuals slowly give over their decision making to a spiritual teacher in things that have nothing to do. So they're asking the teacher what job they should get, what should they do with this, what should they do with that. Well, it's got nothing to do with the apparent skills of that teacher. What's that? I've got one from Martin here. Pardon does, of course, suggest the answer to things like that. Exactly, yeah. As Martin said there, come to the, yeah. And again, I'm not going to say I know. I'm going to say I've got my subjective experience, but I'm not going to put my subjective experience upon a student, because then that becomes something they think they've got to check off. Someone explains or defines an experience, and I think Ron did this in a few answers. Of course, Ron's wonderful, but when I was going through, I think, what was it? It was transplant of consciousness. In a Barden Companion, someone asked, "How do I know when I've truly done it?" And Ron said, "You'll know." And it was like, will you? Well, you knew, but will the student know? We all interpret these things, and then that becomes a block and an expectation. So self-responsibility is a huge one for this stuff. And I think another thing, my last thing I'll say before I move on, is that whatever you're discussing and talking and reading about all this stuff, you should be practicing twice as much as what you're reading, twice as much as what you're thinking about this stuff. Whereas I see it's quite the opposite in many cases. 15, 20 minutes practice, 2 hours reading and 4 hours Facebook arguing. So, you know, so, because a lot of this stuff, when practice is put as the primary thing, and, obviously life gets busy, things happen. I'm certainly not as consistent or as putting in as many hours as I was, but I try to, and I know early on, it was very, very consistent, and a lot of my answers, you know, you get clarity through doing the work. You do something for an hour a day for 2 weeks, and you've pretty much clarified. If you're doing 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, it's hard to build up that effort, that work time to get your answers. So, yeah, practice, double what you're thinking about, what you're theorizing about. I think that would be the biggest thing. Yeah. And I'll leave it there and give some time for everyone else.
Clint, what are some common pitfalls or traps for students that you've come across in your time as a teacher?
Well, there's one major pitfall, and it's basically about living in the world, just living in the world day to day and living in the socioeconomics of whatever world or dimension you're in, going to work, having relationships. I mean, most of the people that I come across usually have issues like that they're working out. And sure, we talk about spiritual practices, but the big challenge is just living in the world day to day and getting through stuff, I think. So that's the biggest challenge, not the magical work, the non-magical work. Oh, well, I guess every moment of every day can be magical work if you approach it from the right state of mind. But yeah, that's the common pitfall I find, living in the world and getting by day to day, and all of the vicissitudes of life that happen.
Wonderful, thank you. That's a very grounded and helpful response. I'm sure a lot of people, there'll be a resonance of like, yeah, that's me. So thank you for that, Clint. A great start. Bob, have you got something you'd like to chime in on as far as what are some common pitfalls or traps for students?
First thing, excellent points all around. Piggybacking on Didi. As much as I'd like to have a student come to me to learn magic because they want to find God, they always come to me because they've got a problem they need to solve and they're stuck. And that goes right into what Clint said about the real challenge is how do you engage with the world in a productive manner? How do you engage with the world in a way that benefits not just you, but other people too? So, you're not in your grandmother's basement conspiracy theory thread hijacking all over the internet all day long. But no, the only thing I'll add to that is the charitable side of my personality would say the following: mastery without metrics is meaningless. A huge problem with a lot of learning systems is they don't metric when you're good to go to the next stage. Vacuity of thought, master it. Okay, what does that mean? Vacuity of thought for 5 minutes. Okay, great. Now I've got something I can concretely go, all right, I met the metric. Now I can move on to the next thing. The not so charitable side of my personality says the same phrase a different way, which is mastery without metrics is marketing. And this also goes back to points folks here have brought up where there are some wonderful, great teachers out there that want the very best for their students. Those folks, in my experience, are in the minority. For a lot of people, this is a business. And, in China, for example, traditionally, with a lot of esoteric systems, one guy or one gal got the whole system. Everybody else got bits and pieces of it. Why? Well, that way someone could make a living at it. But if you weren't that one guy or one gal, what does that mean for you? Right? So the metricing of what you're doing is important. Now, again, like we talked about earlier, some people are going to get there relatively quickly for a variety of reasons. Other people, it's going to be real hard. I mean, I've said this publicly. My clairvoyance is not the best. It's functional, but it took me years of work to be able to do things that my more gifted friends could do in a matter of weeks. Likewise, my transmission ability is pretty good, you know. And the more ethereal people who have better out of body skills, for example, tend to have a real hard time with that. You know, transmitting power to other people is not easy for them. So again, it's nobody is going to be a master of everything. It's too wide an endeavor for that to be the case. You're going to have things you're good at. You're going to have things, okay, I'm competent at. And then you're going to have things that you just really struggle with. Being honest about that with your students so they have realistic expectations is really important. And that goes back again to going, all right, these are the metrics to be able to do it. It's not to say you can't be better than that, right? But this is where people get held up on various steps for years because they're trying to master something and there's no real clear definition of what that means. Yeah, so it's, then again, guys, we're handicapped by the fact that there's no chi meter out there where I can go, oh, your vital force is an 8.7 today, man. Yesterday it was a 5.2. What happened? So everything's a little subjective anyway, right? Yeah. And all of us have had those days where we went in and we were just loaded, and then you did the session and nothing happened. Or other days, like you guys were talking about, you go in, everything's flat, and the people in the class are just having all these amazing experiences, and you're like, great. My favorite one, and I'll stop here, but I once paralyzed a group of hippies on a rooftop in Sayulita, Mexico, doing a 4-letter combination for Earth Element, right? It was just crazy. Spirits were showing up. The building was shaking. I mean, everything, right? Guys, I couldn't repeat that on demand to save my life. It's just, for whatever reason that day, everything worked. I'm honest about that. Hey, it was a good day, right? Not naming names. We all know people out there would be like, oh, yes, I am the master. Yeah, this is blah, 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 blah. When in fact, it was the right time of year, it was the right hour of the whatever, and I don't know. So again, mastery without metrics doesn't mean a whole lot because again, it's all subjective on a certain level anyway. Clint's a little different because he's had some luck, setting stuff on fire and making things immobile and business. So I tip my hat to that. But yeah, man, it's for a lot of this stuff. If you can't define what it is you're supposed to be doing as the end state, it just confuses people, and particularly in the beginning. And guys, we're all beginners sometime. It's all super confusing until it becomes very clear. So, and it's one of the things I owe Mark, because I'd had great training over a 30-year period before I met him, but there'd never been a system to it. He was the first guy who sat me down and went, okay, you do this and then this happens. This is the definition for what this is. Whereas previously, and I'm sure a lot of people here can comment on this, you had great teachers. They'd show you how to do a thing and be like, okay, go practice. So, okay, you practice and you can do it. But you're going, where does this fit into everything else? Is this even good for me? I don't know. So that kind of structure makes it much easier to progress very, very quickly when it's there. And I remember once I did an entire weekend-long seminar on astral and mental level Fajin. Where you hold your hands, a few centimeters away from the guy and you make him move, right? I had no idea what that was at the end of the weekend or what I should actually use it for. So it wasn't until I ran into Mark where he's like, no, it's this, this, and this. And it's like, oh, okay, now I know why I would want to do that. Whereas previously it was just another weird trick, and it's hard to justify practice time if you don't know where it's going, you know. So anyway, yeah, metrics metrics in terms of practice are super important. But again, you can't do it in a way where you cage the development of the student.
Hmm.
So it's not 100%. You, you got to leave room in there for, as everyone said, for the student being able to do things that you can't, because they're different than me, right? Your guy's background in music is going to have a very different approach to the letters of the Kabbalah that I'm going to have because I don't know anything about music, right? Whereas a guy who's very good at out of body stuff like Andre is going to have a much more visionary approach to things than, say, someone like me who really struggles with that. That's what it's going to be. So, anyway, thanks for letting me kind of ramble. I don't know
You're most welcome, brother. I appreciate the response. I think this is useful for people who are watching, especially those watching afterwards who might watch the clipped version. So, when I joined a small teaching school, that was when we introduced rubric type metrics of you would basically have different levels of skill demonstration, and that's the kind of the report card we would give back to the parents so they could see where the student was measuring up, because how do you gauge what progress is? And like you said, it's in the nature of what we're talking about, there is some objective metrics, but largely this adventure is it's going to be subjective. So you've got to have your own sort of internal systems or methods of monitoring and evaluating what even is progress on this. So I think time-based things, being able to do something, I think that's the fact that Barton introduces that pretty early on in the book. But you're right, using vague terms like mastery and things like that, it needs to be specific. So because that word could mean so many different things to different people. Now, Didi and Armand, we'll go with Armand to start with. What could you comment on as far as what are some common pitfalls or traps for students?
Yeah. So yeah, it's almost hard to add to what's already been said, because I so agree with everything. It's. I think one important thing is that people who grow up in a school system, which I didn't like, but tend to have a feeling is like, is this correct? Should it be like this? Should it go like that? Is what But I think we all learn differently. We have different ways of some people are good at this, some good at that. So I think everyone should start to learn what their specific way of learning is. And of course, there's in this path there are specific things that are sort of they need to be in place for to go somewhere. But it's more that feeling that I see sometimes with students, like, oh, is this correct? So they give their power a little bit away, which is understandable when you don't know that much yet. But the thing is, they also have to learn how to trust their own internal tuning fork for what resonates with them in their unique journey and where it is they want to go at that point. And just like Clint said, most people that I teach, they have problems in life, right? They have problems out there. They have problems with their energy, how to navigate that in the energy around them, and how to deal with that. So they have things that they want to move beyond, right? And so when you start looking at the training as a sort of like 1, 2, 3, 4, like that, it can be very distracting too. So getting to the core of what it is that you want to do is, I think, crucial. But that's a development too. We have to learn to trust also that internal tuning fork. I think that's very important. That's one thing. The other thing is that don't push your training forward. It's not like, because life happens right now, so you can always be aware right now. So I think a lot of people take, that I've met too, is like they sort of put on the training jacket and then put it in the corner in the rest of their day. And I'm like, don't do that. If you want to make real progress, you have to realize that we have to cross that bridge, that you are energy. It's not something that you have. You don't have a life. You are life right Now, so you have always a choice to, choose the state. What is the state right now? And live the practice, right? Instead of something like, that's a major one, and it helped me a lot when I started to cross that bridge and looked at a training like that. It's like I'm a living process, right? So the pitfall, that's a big pitfall. So they always push the results in the future. That I know these people, instead of like, wait a minute, I can choose that result that I desire so much right now by switching my state. Boom. Right? And of course, underneath, we're working on what is causing that this state comes up that is not so desirable, right? So, and that's also the thing, is that the pitfall can be is that you turn too narrow in this, right? There's other stuff out there that you can learn and trust, that you can bring into what you already know and bring that into the practice as well. So these are some of these aspects that I see a lot with students, that when we can tackle these, if you will, you see the progress go like this. It's like, oh, wait a minute, now I can start trusting the inside. What is calling to me in this practice? And yeah, it's this. And okay, so now how does the training line up for you specifically in this situation? Right? How does it line up? What element is your thing? Or when we look at the soul mirror, where is your thing? And then how do we bring this all together so that it supports your specific journey, right? Instead of looking at outside yourself, looking for some. Well, the thing is, Phil, what I tried to say here is, some people might train this out of interest, if you will, but not my students. They don't. I see them. They train not for interest. They train for life, for deeper understanding, for their own unique problems, for they're sort of desperate, you could say, in some sense, to make sense and get meaning out of this whole thing that we call life, and who they are and what they are. So yeah, these are some of the things that I see, and I help people cross quickly. And I'm lucky that I want to say this, the last thing I say about it is that the teachers I had stimulated this sort of thought too, so they also helped me to sort of become more self-confident in what I was feeling around this, right? Instead of waiting for sort of permission to take that next step to that, or no lie, just read the book, underline what resonates, line up the practice, and there you go. Like, oh, really? This is not what I was taught in school, right? This is different. So, so yeah. So I hope this helps.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, brother. Didi, have you got anything you'd like to chime in with what are some common pitfalls or traps for students? I know that, you have a background in some other disciplines as well. And so, anything you can share on this very general question would be lovely. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm like thinking about something that isn't said before, but one of the things I was thinking about is like what I see happening, that people come in and they're like, yes, I want to do this. I'm up for it. And they just, especially when I do school, they think, okay, I'm going to change my life, basically. And then they go all in. And after like 2 weeks, they're on a dead end. And then they stop. And I'm like, okay, why not try it with a little bit more moderation in the beginning? Just, start with little steps and then see results, and then go a little bit further and add to that, instead of, throwing everything in and then just stop. So sometimes, yeah, I see that happening quite a lot, that they want to make that big shift, and so yeah, crash, and then it's also the same with workouts. You see that happening a lot. They all we're coming to the end of the year, so 1st of January, we're all starting, get a new membership, do the workout, and after 2 weeks it's all empty, and so yeah, it's like, okay, and also check your motivation. So I love people to, because this is also something that I see a lot, is that people forget about the things why they start when it's solved. So, for example, somebody comes in with a problem and you give them tips and they start applying and it actually helps them and it stops. And now, as yeah, they kind of feel that the motivation to do it is kind of gone, which is a pity actually. Because there's so much more to, to continue going. And so yeah, it's how do you keep on the path for a long time, keep yourself motivated. See, I love to um, uh, write down your results as well and celebrate, but then continue and see what else is there and to get new goals and measure. And yeah, so that's a different point.
Sounds like
Yeah.
kung fu, right?
Yeah.
Slow little steps and then.
Yeah. Yeah.